Welcome back to calculus. All right, so we want to do some more with some integrations here and kind of talk about a few things that are really kind of neat about doing integrations and derivatives and how they interact with each other. So the first thing I want to look at here is something like this. So what we have is essentially a definition. We're saying that g of x is equal to the integration from 0 to x of all this stuff. Now, a couple of big pieces I want to point out to make sure that you're seeing them is that I am defining g of x, and over here I'm defining it with t as my variable. That's not a mistake. That is intentionally done. Notice here, this is doing dt, which means my derivative, my integration is being done with respect to the variable t. Well, if I'm doing the integration with respect to the variable t, then I'm doing these variables right here. Now, if you have some serious background in calculus already, you already know you might go about trying to do this integration. But it gets easier than what you're trying to do. We can't go through and do this integration quite easily. All right. But in this particular instance, let's just say that I want to find g prime of x. Well, what that means is that I want to go back to the original function here and do this. Now remember, this is a notation that means find the derivative of something, right? And in this case, we're finding the derivative with respect to x. So this is integration with respect to t. This is the derivative with respect to x. So the connection here is the fact that you would integrate this. And the first fundamental theorem of calculus tells us that when we do this, right, this would end up being big G of x minus big G of 0. Well, if we're going to do this of 0, what's going to happen to the entire term? The entire term, that entire piece, this entire second piece would be 0. So really what this ends up being is this ends up being G of x, the integration of G of x. That's not a minus sign, that's an extra little typo there, sorry about that. So if we want to find g prime, then what we need to do, well, I guess I didn't need to use capital G's, little g's would have been just fine here. If I want to find the derivative of this, all I really need to do is go back to what I was dealing with here in the original function, is because I would do this integration, I'd plug an x in, that'd give me g of x. Now, what I can then do is I can say, well, if I want that derivative, I would go right back to where I started from. So this would be the square root of x squared plus 3x. Now, there's a much longer explanation I can give you for that, but that is essentially what we were doing, that entire piece there. Now, I can kind of prove this to you in a simpler example. Let's just say that we say g of x is equal to the integration from 0 to x of x squared, t squared dt, right? So that integration would mean that we would need to do t to the third power over 3 evaluated from 0 to x. So that means that this is x cubed over 3 minus 0 cubed over 3, which is just x cubed over 3. Now, this is a little different than just doing the integration. So if we just did the integration, the indefinite integration of t squared dt, then that would give us t cubed over 3 plus c. Notice the difference here. First and foremost, the variable is different. Secondly, I don't have the plus c on the end of this, all right? Now, that's not a big deal necessarily right now, but it does become an issue later on in other things that we do. So if we now want g prime of x, we're just going to do that derivative, which means we'll do 3x squared over 3, which simplifies into x squared. So we go from t squared being the original function to x squared being that equivalent function. All right, so this would have been g prime before, or this actually what this would have been like f prime, or f, however you want to define that, but let's go ahead and define that as f prime. So here g prime and f prime are the same thing with different variables attached to them. And that can be very useful when we are changing systems or we're changing the domain set that we're working with. All right, so I hope that these are being useful to you. Please reach out with questions, comments as you need. And if you need additional videos or additional examples as we work through these, please let me know. Take care.